So during the 2023 State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the social relief of distress grant would continue in a bid to counter the cost of living. Cyril Ramaphosa also said the grant currently reaches around 7.8 million people. However, SASSA has revealed that over 13 million people applied for the grant in January alone. For more on this, we're joined by Economist Mariam Altman. Mariam, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So let's stick on that for the purposes of this conversation, what SASSA presented to Parliament. So they mentioned that 13 million people applied for the grant, mostly from KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng and Limpopo. They also stressed that the majority of those receiving the 350 Rand grant are women. And so can we find evidence to suggest that when young women in this country do not have agency or economic agency, then we trying to find all these solutions around GBV, but until we can get this right amongst other issues, then that scourge will continue?
Oh, that's a lot in one statement. The first issue is that the numbers aren't very surprising in a context of incredibly high unemployment, that more women are unemployed than men are, that those are the most populous provinces. Those numbers aren't surprising. And then there's no welfare grant for people who are working age and unemployed. So that's the bulk of people who were applying. And of course, life has gotten much harder after COVID and hasn't gotten easier in these low growth rates. And then of course there's a child support grant and an old age grant, and millions of people receive these grants in addition to that. On the GBV question, gender-based violence, just to say that there's no doubt that the stress that people face and the intensifying stress and living conditions that people live in create a hotbed that certainly intensifies gender-based violence.
The agency also revealed that mostly young people receive the grant that was introduced during COVID-19 between the ages of 18 and 35 years. At least 45% of them, though, have a grade 12 certificate. That we have young people who do, by requirement, finish their matric, yet are still struggling not only to enter into the job market, but are relying on grants, should tell us what?
Well, when unemployment rates rise, the first people who lose their jobs are young people. It's a first in, first out type of principle. It's already hardest for young people, so that you have much higher unemployment rates amongst people who are below age of 30 than over 30 or over 35. So those figures would tell you that this period, how hard it's been for people who are entering the labor market, that it's not so much that jobs are getting created, but rather destroyed, and that the entry point for young people is becoming harder and harder.
How sustainable is this, right? Especially when we take a look at the number of people who are depending on social grants in South Africa. During the January 8th statement, the president also made it known that almost half of the population of South Africa is solely dependent on government assistance.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would agree with that figure. Many millions of people work. Let's just remember that. And also, the work I've been doing over many years shows that that around the world, increasingly people are even in developing countries, that people are increasingly working and also needing a grant. And that's partly because of the that services work has become more prominent, and that wages tend to be lower relative to the cost of living in so many countries, whether developed or developing. So across South Africa, Brazil, India, you go around the world, and China, and working people need state support to make ends meet in so many countries around the world, including South Africa. So getting welfare or grants does not necessarily mean that you are completely dependent on it, but rather that this is the state of being. The grant system, and when I was a National Planning Commissioner, we looked at this question, is sustainable fiscally But the situation we're in is not sustainable, and that's not because people get welfare grants or other kinds of grants like a child support grant, which is not a welfare grant. Now, the thing that's unsustainable is that we have an economy that may be growing by less than 1% this year, that we may even be going into a recession according to some, that we have institutions that feel like they're moving backwards and crumbling, that the society is starting to feel more strained, not less, that opportunity for young people seem to be diminishing, that small business has become a smaller proportion of overall business, which of course is where business enters and where people get new opportunities. There are so many metrics that show that we're not going in the right direction. And so what's not sustainable is that if we don't have a thriving, inclusive and growing economy, then we're not going to be able to solve these problems. So it's not, the welfare system is actually sustainable fiscally. Particularly if we can get onto some kind of positively directed growth trajectory.
Yeah. What does that look like? You mentioned that we're not going in the right direction, and also maybe just a two-pronged question. What is the unintended consequence of not going in the right direction?
Well, the unintended consequences is exactly the stuff you raised. It's more gender-based violence. It's more municipal protests. It's people not believing in the national project, that people have to start focusing on themselves. Society becomes more frayed because they don't believe in the national project that we're meant to be working on to solve for the significant challenges of South Africa in relation to race, income inequality, unemployment. We've got to be coming together with some kind of common purpose and getting this economy moving. And I guess people start to not just start, but they show that they feel that the only way they can express themselves is through violence, be that personal or be that municipal protests and so on, as opposed to feeling that they could be part of something and building this nation, which is what we should be doing. So this is social, political, institutional in the main.
Absolutely. What's South Africa's national project, Mariam?
Well, the NDP, of course. The National Development Plan laid out what it was we needed to do across the board in relation to giving life to our constitutional objectives. That was really, the constitutional objectives are really what our goal is, which in essence is to create a decent life, that living a decent life that is not distressed, which in turn, by the way, helps along the GBV issues in this country. Not only, but it helps. It makes it worse. But the social stress that people feel, even working class people, even people who are working and middle class people, it's very stressful, very precarious. People feel less inclined to be part of that national question. We need shared purpose around everybody living a decent life, being able to get educated, find a job, start a household, have a family, with some kind of reasonable security and peace of mind. I mean, that really has to be what this whole thing is about. Whether I'm very involved in infrastructure planning right now, but whether you're talking about labor markets or infrastructure or education or anything that we're doing, it has to ultimately be about every person in this country living a decent life.
How's that going, Mariam? I mean, some of the objectives of the NDP by 2030 include things like strong leadership throughout society that work together to solve problems. Given that we are in 2023, a reduction in the number of people who live in households with a monthly income below 419 Rand per person, a reduction of inequality as measured by the Gini coefficient, and we are a country that is also known for being the most unequal in the world. Is it time to reimagine it?
I don't think the essence is to reimagine the NDP, because that would require us to dumb down what our goals are. We should be seeking full employment. We should be seeing more equity. We should be aspiring to have a decent life. We have the incredible opportunity of free voice in this country. We have a free press and a free voice, and that means that everybody in this country should be using that in a productive way and constructive way. to be turning the situation around, even if it's just to use your voice. What I try to do in the work that I do as a National Planning Commissioner or in the National Infrastructure Plan is to focus in on those institutional questions that aren't going well, and particularly over the past decade, that have really crumbled in many ways. The commitment to leadership, governance, the quality of technical capacity, for example, in the delivery of infrastructure. And I hope that this work, whether it was the Planning Commission or this work right now for Infrastructure South Africa, helps guide government, but also civil society. That it lifts up those things that have to happen. I think many people don't realize what a gift it is to have the freedom to be able to speak. And we should be using that. Any democracy requires citizens to be active in ensuring, firstly, that aspirations are achieved, and they should not be dumbed down because we haven't achieved them. We have to double up our effort to achieve them. We're letting the country down when we do that. I'm saying that because I get asked that a lot. In other words, we were after full employment, but is it a fool's paradise? No, of course it's not. We have to keep fighting for it. Fighting and working towards it. We have to. And we have the opportunity to do it. And in many countries, that's not true.
Fair enough. Mariam Altman is an economist. Thank you.